Hello. So today I'm going to be giving a lesson on some tips on surviving the wilderness if you ever, find yourself in that situation. So I'm just going to give some general tips. So I hope that you enjoy this lesson. So the first tip, stay calm. Don't panic. It's understandable if you're feeling panicky or anxious, but you don't want to panic because then you're not going to be able to, think right. You've got to keep, a calm mind, so you can start devising a plan. The next thing, some tips on how to start a fire. So fire is kind of, the one thing that you think of when you're thinking of survival and how do you do it. So it's also a thing that many people take for granted. So it's always there when you need it. You just press the lighter. It's much easier, but it's much harder when you're in the wilderness. So there's 3 things needed to start a fire: fuel, oxygen, and a spark. So you have 2 of these in abundance in the wild. There's almost an unlimited amount of, fuel in the form of twigs, branches, dry leaves, and there's oxygen all around. So what you're missing is the spark or the heat, okay? So one thing that you can do is flint and steel. So flint and steel are probably one of the oldest tricks to start a fire. All you need to do is strike the flint against the steel to make a spark. So you can buy portable steel, and flint sets are cheap these days. So, if you're ever going into the wilderness, maybe bring it. And then an improvised magnifying glass. So what if you didn't carry flint and steel? You can use magnifying glass. So you can use the power of the sun to start a fire. I don't have the details on that, but if you're interested in that, definitely look into that. So that's one way. And then also you're going to want to know, how to make a smoke signal. So assuming that you've started the fire, the next step is to, let potential rescuers know your position. So a smoke signal is a great way to do that. If the woods are thick, it might not be possible to, get through the canopy. If the search party is looking for you from a helicopter, they might not see. So try to, start a fire where you can get some signal. It's one of the oldest, traditional ways to really find someone. So again, you want to find a good location. So make sure there's less vegetation, not covering the area so they can see the smoke signal. And then light the fire, make smoke. And then, sometimes you might have the issue of rain. So there are some tips to start a fire and, continue that fire. So the first thing you're going to want to do, is avoid the pit. So if the weather's dry, digging a small hole to keep your firewood dry is a good idea. However, in wet weather, the pit can quickly fill up with rainwater. So if it's raining, just skip it. You're also going to want to look for dry pieces of wood. They might be under thick trees, under sticks. You probably can find some. And then use pine and needle-bearing leaves. So that's going to give you a lot of fuel. Make small pieces of your firewood. Small pieces burn easier and better. Another thing, another helpful tip, once you get the fire going, you're going to want to have a char cloth. So it's important to make provisions to the next one. You must make sure that the next fire that you start does not require the amount of work needed to start the first. So a char cloth, it's kind of a hurdle, but you're going to take a small piece of cloth and shove it in a metal box or container and make sure that that container container is sealed and throw it in the fire. Then you're going to let the container burn in the fire for a few minutes, remove it from the fire, and let it cool. The cloth is called the char cloth. It catches fire with the smallest of sparks. So just a helpful tip. Another thing that you're going to need to do, shelter. So you got fire, shelter, water, things like that. So shelter, it's an important aspect of survival in the wilderness. It can protect you from weather elements, animals, things like that. Just some tips: you never want to build shelter on damp ground. Never build shelter on highlands or tops of hills. The wind can get cold at night, and with no trees to resist, you're running the risk of your shelter being blown away by the gusts. Similarly, making a shelter at the bottom of a narrow valley, cold wind collects there, so you don't want to do that as well. You want to find kind of a happy medium. And then there's different designs. There's the cocoon, so it's exactly what it sounds like. If it's, dark, it's a bunch of leaves and twigs, and you're going to kind of make a mound of sorts. It should be about 2 feet high. Once the pile is assembled, you can crawl under it. It's a natural sleeping area that will keep you warm. Then you also have the A-frame. So with the A-frame, you can find some sticks. You can make a sturdy shelter in no time. So you're going to find 2 sticks about 5 feet long and 1 about 10 feet long. Prop the shorter sticks so that you can create an A shape. Now prop the longer stick on top of the A shape that you made and tie the 3 sticks together. You'll already kind of have just like a tent shape there, and you can reinforce it by propping more sticks to support the longer stick. And then another tip, you're going to want a bed, a comfortable sleeping space, so you don't want to sleep on the bare floor of the woods. You can make a bed out of dry leaves by arranging them from inside your shelter. The bed will prevent the heat from your body seeping into the cold forest ground. So again, how else can you stay warm in the forest? Layering is always a great option. Empty, your bladder to stay warm. Cover your head. Heat escapes from your head, so that's always a good tip. And then another tip, with water, you're going to want to learn how to make a water filter. So although there may be, fresh water in the wilderness, drinking water from a puddle or a lake is not, recommended. Drinking from a flowing stream is always better than drinking from, a stagnant pool of water that's not moving. However, there may be a situation when you don't have that option. So what you can do is you can find an empty bottle or container. You can poke small holes in the bottom of the container. Make a small, holes, use a stick or something like that. And then you can fill the bottle up to 1 inch or 2 with gravel, sand, charcoal, things like that. And then you're going to add water to the top layer of this fine sand or charcoal or whatever you chose. And then it's going to kind of filter through. So it's not, an amazing filters, but it should help kind of eliminate some of those things that you don't want to be drinking. And then there's some tips on how to collect water as well. So, maybe you can't find any water sources. So there's other things that you can do. So you can look for a thick green tree with a lot of branches. So early in the morning, you just tie a plastic bag over a branch that has a bunch of leaves. And then, you're going to want to make sure it's completely covered with the plastic bag. You can also weigh down the plastic bag by adding a small rock. This creates a low point in the bag for water to collect. So that's going to kind of help you collect some water that way. And then another thing is, learning how to tell directions in the wild. So some tips for this: look for moss on a tree trunk. Mosses usually grow as far away from the sunlight and are often found on the north side of the trees and root rocks. If a tree or rock is covered in moss, it'll be the thickest on the north side. Spider webs appear on the north side of trees, so if you happen to find some, it can be a good indication of direction as well. If the sun is out, put a stick in the ground and mark the end of the shadow of the stick in the ground. Wait a few minutes, the shadow will move. Now mark the end of the new position of the shadow. The line joining these 2 points will run east to west. And if you're near a body of water, what you can do is, looking at the animals and looking at the west side of the water reserves that way. So those are just tips. Obviously nothing is absolute. Another tip for directions: find the North Star. So, this is something that will help you at night. So the other tips are more for the daytime. So the first thing that you should do is look for the Big Dipper. It contains 7 stars that form a somewhat bowl with a handle shape. Once you find that, you're going to be able to, so the stars that make up the edge of the bowl, so the Big Dipper kind of looks like a pan with a handle. So the stars that are on the handle from the bowl, these are called the pointer stars. And you're just going to draw an imaginary line from these 2 and extend to find a bright star. That's the North Star. So the North Star always points to the true north. No matter the season, it's always good to look at these constellations when you have time, just to kind of get the knowledge of them. And then another tip: process your food as far as away from your shelter as possible. So if you're making, food, you don't want other predators to come to your shelter, so you're going to want to do that away from where you're staying. You'll be much safer that way. So continuing on, learning to improvise cooking utensils is also a helpful thing. If you find yourself in a survival type of situation, you're not going to have utensils to cook your food. So you might have to improvise, maybe making like a makeshift grill, using metal rods, or, picks that you have from your tent or backpack if you have that. Once you have a fire going, you can create a temporary grill using these metal wires. It's a helpful tip. Another thing is learn to identify edible plants. So this is one of the keys to survival in the wilderness, to keep yourself fed. Obviously going to need energy. So one of the best sources of food in the wilderness is plants. However, they're not all going to be edible. Some of them are poisonous and can be very, very dangerous if consumed. So, there's no certain way of telling whether a plant or fruit is toxic just by looking at it. So you can look for common characteristics of poisonous plants. So most of them are going to have, thorns or spikes. If you taste it and it tastes bitter, they're going to have a milky sap. So most of the plants with white fluids are highly toxic, so avoid them. Another way to identify edible plants is, just studying a little bit. That's kind of a little bit of a tip for that. Another thing, you're going to need water to survive. So if you're stranded in the middle of a thick jungle, finding actual drinkable water can be a challenge. So, you can look for clues and signs. So some of those clues, if you spot bees, that's always a great sign. So it means that there's a hive full of honey nearby, but also a water source. Bees are usually found about 4 to 5 miles from a water source. The presence of birds is also another good sign. Birds, and finches like being around water. So another thing that you can think of is sorry, never mind. Also, another thing you want to think about is don't travel in the dark. That's when you should be resting in your shelter. You may not want to take a break, but you should. It's kind of an invitation to danger. You know, the predatory animals come out at night, and they're made for hunting at night. So just stay where you are. If you can, pack rain ponchos. You can use them for many different things. So they can be used, to help protect a shelter if it's raining. You can use the rain water that you collect from the raincoat or poncho. You can also distill salt water using one of the condensing circuits to collect the desalinated water. So if you have a backpack, I would definitely get a raincoat in there. Another thing that's important is learn to predict the incoming rain or storms by looking at the sun or moon. So obviously you're not going to get the Weather Channel out there, you don't know what's going on. So if there's a halo around the sun or the moon, it usually indicates that low pressure is approaching, meaning there's probably going to be a storm in the next 24 to 36 hours. Always carry an extra pair of socks. It's one of the, most flexible pieces of clothing. It can prevent blisters, especially when you're walking long distances. You want to have your feet be comfortable. If you have hand sanitizer, you can use that to kindle a fire as well. Another thing is add aluminum foil to your survival kit. So aluminum foil is a tool that you must have in your survival kit. You can use it for all sorts of things, utensils, heat reflectors, a dry surface to start a fire. So it's just a good tip if you have a survival kit. And don't make shelter downwind to your campfire. So it's tempting to make your shelter by your campfire. But, the logical explanation that is, the heat will be carried to the shelter. Another helpful tip is you can catch more fish by facing into the wind. So if you're fishing for food in the wild, you can catch more fish if you cast your bait while facing into the wind. So it's known that 99% of fish swim toward the wind. So fishing into the wind will allow you to cast a bait in front of fish rather than behind. Another tip, don't attempt to cross a rapid, fast-moving river or stream. Just, kind of common sense. You don't know the speed. You don't know, you could be swept away. So always just play it safe. Duct tape is a helpful thing to have in your backpack. You can use it to tape your shoelaces, many different things, sticks together, things like that. If you've got coconuts around, coconut water contains a lot of nutrients, hydration, it can keep you alive, so that's a great thing. You've got food and water there. But that's all the tips that I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this lesson.